Hey everybody, so this week I am looking at the notion of romanticism in the Victorian era in art and literature, and how that is a very, in my opinion, inaccurate representation of how things were. I am taking the stand this week that the way that laws were designed that affected women in particular in marriages really did not allow for romantic relationships, loving marriages. So there is this romanticism that sort of goes along with Victorianism, right? So you've got novels with these, beautiful, sexy ladies in their big gowns on the front, and except that what seems odd to me is there's always like the big back cut out, or it's droopy, it's showing skin. Victorian women weren't supposed to show skin because they were, in doing that, advertising themselves to men that were not their husbands, and they were property. They were not allowed to do that. They belonged to their husband. So that's kind of, silly, but it is what it is. The other thing that you can look at is art. There's a lot of, you can do a Google search, Victorian art, and it's like, they're sort of gazing at each other, and they're very tenderly caressing one another, or sort of, it's suggestive of this sort of happily ever after kind of relationship, very romantic, the notion. And then there was also, a sort of on a more practical side, in addition to that, there was, during the Victorian era, a British medical doctor named William Acton, and he once was quoted as saying, "The moderate gratification of the sex passion in married life is generally followed by the happiest consequences of the individual." So saying that a proper amount of that physical relationship in a marriage was going to make for a happy marriage. But that implies that there has to be moderation, that there can't be like all the time, which here's where the issue starts with me, because it was not legal for a woman to moderate that. Okay? So women were considered property. They were possessions once they got married, so a man in choosing a wife was going to try to choose the wife that was going to get him the largest possible amount of income, okay, so dowries, because once they got married, the woman and her property became the man's property, so the more she had to bring in, the more he gained from it. That was something that he was taking into consideration when picking a wife. So that right there kind of eliminates the romantic prospects for me. I'm not a commodity. I'm not something you can buy. Okay, so that I take issue with there. But then there are all these laws that are written that are so imbalanced that really make it so that women do not have a leg to stand on. It is all about the men during the Victorian era as far as marriage laws go. And it in my opinion does not allow for, in general, there to be happy loving marriages. They're just not designed that way. So the first one that I am going to mention, there was something called the criminal conversation, and that allowed men to sue another man for committing adultery with his wife, but a wife was not allowed to do the same thing, because she could not be cheated on, because she was not a person, she was property. Okay, so right, that one too, real big imbalance. Okay, so, but think about it, right? So if a woman is property, a man can do pretty much whatever he wants with his property. If I don't like my dining chairs, I can chuck them in the garbage and get new ones. Who cares? It's a chair. It's not going to hurt the chair's feelings. Chair's not going to feel a thing. Get a new one. Women were property, just like my chair. Okay, it's the idea of women accusing their husband of adultery. It's kind of like if I drove a different car and then my car was like, "Hey, you cheated on me." It's a thing. It can't do that. My car will never feel like I've cheated on it because it's an inanimate object. It's my property. Same idea, the way I see it. Okay, so take this a step further. Women are, a wife, rather, not women, a wife is a man's property. He can do what he wants with her. That means it's legal for a man to rape his wife. Okay? Uh, but the kicker here is that you couldn't actually rape your wife. And the reason why is not because you could not force a woman, force your wife into an act, but you can't rape what's not a person. Again, she's a thing. She's property. So, sorry, just thinking about it kind of ticks me off a little bit. So, a woman was not allowed to refuse her husband. She couldn't refuse her husband because she didn't have an opinion. Again, she's a thing. She's property. A woman who left her husband claiming rape as the reason was guilty of desertion. You know, she couldn't say, I have to get out of this marriage because he rapes me, he abuses me. It didn't happen. You're a thing. You can't, if you're not a person, you can't have a crime committed against you. Okay, so that law is in place, which is pretty messed up, you know. Okay, so then, if you take that a little bit further, a man can rape his wife, he can beat her, he can starve her, he can abandon her. She's just a thing. He can do these things. The only way that a woman could get a divorce from a man once divorce became legal was if she could prove that he was not only an adulterer, but that he also was at least one other thing. One other thing that fell within abuse, so he's physically abusive, if he's incestuous, or if he's bestial. She had to prove one of those three things along with adultery. Even if she could afford to pursue divorce and was willing to lose her kids, because until laws changed, women couldn't keep their kids, he could just say she was lying. You know, how is she really going to prove it? You know, it was a man's world. So no, she's lying. She's crazy. She's delusional. She's whatever. Can you prove it? You know, the divorce rate wasn't very high. The separation rate was higher because divorce was expensive and difficult for a woman to get, you know, and men didn't want to divorce their wives. They wanted to keep their property. So it's, you know, just more of the makings of the imbalance and how I don't see how there really could be genuinely loving relationships when the laws were designed this way. So one of the other things that I picked up, there was a law, it's called the Contagious Diseases Act. Now this sort of took the idea of rape to another level, because what this act said was that it gave police, not everywhere, but in certain areas, the authority to detain women that they thought might be a prostitute, and to forcibly subject them, to gynecological examinations in order to determine whether or not they had VD. Okay, this was part of an attempt to clean up the area, to get rid of VD. They would go after these women rather than looking at what kind of social structure is in place that is creating this spread. You know, maybe we should look at other things. But they went after the women, not any of the men. So women who refused, they were forced to undergo examination. They did not have a choice. And women who were deemed to be infected, they could be detained in a hospital for up to 6 months. So these women were forced to this examination. There was, they called it instrumental rape because of the instruments they were using to do this examination. They were forcing this thing into a woman. They were in essence raping her. It was forced entry into her body to do this examination. And so, you know, it speaks to how women were looked at in society and how little value was placed on them as a person, you know, and how they were really just kind of a thing that anybody could do anything to, you know. And it's once they got married, or if they decided to enter into the profession of prostitution, which sadly was one of the few uh, career options, for lack of a better term, open to a woman. There weren't a lot of ways that a woman could support herself, so that was one of them, sadly. So if you take the way these laws are designed, and that's just a few of them, and look at how they are designed to give men all of the power, and to not only not give women power, but to make them the subject of abuse legally, to take away any chance they have of protecting themselves. It's with that mindset, with that mentality in a society, I just don't see how there could have been room for romantic and loving relationships. The one exception that pops up that I keep seeing is Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning and their relationship and their marriage, and they really did seem like a very loving couple from what I've read. And they got married later in life. I believe she was 40 and he was 34, and they had a child, and they were married for about 15 years, and they were happy, and they the letters that they wrote to each other and poetry certainly speaks to that. And it's a great thing, but it's the only one I can find. So it's not the norm, it's an exception to the rule, easily. So, my claim, and tell me what you think of it, is that there's just no way. There's just no way in Victorian England, with the way that the laws were designed, the way that society viewed women, the way that marriage was entered into from the very get-go, with women just being a chance to get more things. I just don't see that there was room for loving marriages that were companionate marriages, rather than something that was matched because it was appropriate and there was some gain financially to be gotten. So I think that, and two, I mean, just sort of something to think about. What if feminists had not fought to make changes to legislation? Where would it be? How? I mean, it could have gone on indefinitely. A power structure can go on for quite some time the way it is. So what would it be like if those laws were still in place right now? I wouldn't be here working on a master's program. I'm 34. I'd either be a spinster or I'd have been married, probably in a horrible marriage, for at least the last 10 years. So it's just something to consider. But again, wanted to keep this a little bit shorter for you this week, because last week I had a lot to say. But I invite you to give me your opinion. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think that there were those romantic relationships, there were loving marriages? Or do you think that I'm right? Do you think that there was no room for them because of the way laws were designed? Or is it something in the middle? So I'm hope that you'll give a watch and give an opinion, because I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say. Thanks.